Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So here's the first of the year-end videos, and in contrast to last year where I was actually ahead of schedule, this year I am behind schedule. By this time last year I had already made this video a week earlier in the month of December. But looking at the calendar, I'm about halfway through December, and now we need to get on with it and get a couple of these things recorded. So we're going to start off with the first one, which tends to be the easiest one, which is the goals video. It is where I go over last year's goals. This is now the fourth year that I've done this, I think. And every year I have a bit of a mixed bag in terms of some of the goals get accomplished, some of the goals don't. And it's usually useful to go back and look at, okay, but why did that happen? And this year, I think, was the theme of I had a couple of different projects go on the go. I had the goals there and I had the list of them, and I was kind of keeping tabs on it. And I did make some progress towards the end of the year, but a lot of different distractions got me away from focusing on the list itself. And I did make some decisions, though, that are going to help with the goals for 2024. Specifically, though, I think a lot of the goals are going to stay very much the same because the general objectives are the same. What I may look at maybe for 2025 is going to be trying to see if there's any other pieces that I should add, because I've left some of the other player collections and things off of this list previously. It's pretty much a group of sets that I'm working on and the Medano collection, because that tends to be the priority. But I've definitely made some inroads in some of the other player collections I have, including the Brett Favre. But there's really no goals associated to it since I kind of just play it by feel and try to decide what is interesting to me. And I usually pick it up that way. And that kind of makes it tricky to have any kind of a goal associated to it when it's just, if you see a cool card that you think makes sense, then you grab it, or otherwise you don't. Anyway, with all that said, we'll get into this one, and then the other two, which includes the year-end recap as well as my favorite pickups video. Those will be recorded probably in the next week or so that we can get them out on the channel before the end of the year. So to start off with, we're going to recap last year's goals here with a little slideshow, and we're going to start off with that. So these are the 2023 collecting goals for the sets. I started off with the 2018 Topps Chrome UFC Autos set. The goal was to finish the set, and if you notice, the result is actually the same result as last year. Right now we're 31 of 33 cards. Now I'm going to make a little bit of an amendment to that, and I'll show that in the slide for the new year's goals. But really what it came down to is that the Sean O'Malley card, I just didn't pick it up during the year. And the Mark Hunt, I continue to not be able to find it. It's on the checklist, but it's one of those things where I haven't seen one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an executive decision, and it's going to be reflected in the goals for 2024, and we'll come back to this one. Next up here is the 1996 Topps Mystery Finest Refractor set, which is actually not a very difficult set at all. It's one of those things where the majority of the stuff was on COMC, and I only had about 5 or 6 cards left last year, and I just didn't get around to it. But I did make a little late surge here and grab a couple on COMC. This is a situation where even though it's on COMC, I'll count it. In another case, I won't, and I'll get into that here in a second, since I do generally prefer to have them in hand. But since it's part of a set, it's one of those things where I just marked it off the checklist and I count it. Now, the only one left here in this one is the Barry Bonds, and that's just one where I'm just looking for one at a price point that I'm happy with. And honestly, you can get it between 15 and 20 bucks, maybe a little bit less. So that's kind of what I'm shooting for, since I didn't want to pay too much for it. But that's the last one. And then I get my hands on that one, and that set is completed. Next one here, I did also narrowly miss. I was shooting for 37 of 47, but I ended up at 35 different cards. But I was able to pick up a nice group of them, including some of the nicer Hall of Famer cards as part of it. So I did make some progress, and we're definitely going to try to move forward into that for next year, since I particularly look forward to the possibility of doing a showcase of the completed set, which is a really nice one. So I do enjoy trying to pick those up, and I did make a concerted effort in the latter portion of the year to really start knocking those down. Next up here is the first of the two vintage sets that I was working on. One of them was a 63 Fleer baseball, which I don't notate it here, but I'm working on it for the set registry, so they're all graded. Otherwise, I could just get the raw singles and it'd be fine. But since I'm adding that little extra layer, it did make it a lot slower. And I did grab a couple at the Fall Expo, and I think a couple at the Spring Expo, but I didn't make as much progress as I thought I would. I actually thought I would be finishing that set, but it turns out that I got to 41 cards. But I did add a group of cards from the previous year, and I'm going to make a slight adjustment to that one for the 2024. That's why I say sometimes you'll have an ambitious aim, and then you'll realize, oh, well, some stuff came up or some other things were the priority during that different time. So it ended up slowing down the process. And I wasn't just going to go running onto eBay and just hitting buy it now and a bunch of things just to try to fill in a goal. It's one of those things where it's nice to have as a goal and you try to shoot for it. But if for some reason you need to deviate from it, that's completely fine. That's the idea, to keep it nice and flexible. Now, in the same vein, the 53 Bowman color set, I thought I would be about 90 cards, but that would have required a more concerted effort. Like sets wise, honestly, I did not put the effort or the concentration into it that I thought I would. I did much better with the player collections, even the ones that fell outside of the goals. And I'll get into that piece here in the second slide, but that clearly this section suffered from the fact that I didn't put the focus on it as much. So here's the 2023 collecting goals for the Mike Modano PC. And the first one was a specific group of cards from 95-96 to 99-2000. So that 5-year block, because I broke up all the 1990 stuff into those 5-year blocks. And specifically here, I wanted to get that checklist, the remaining want list for it, under 78 cards. Well, the result was I ended up at exactly 78 cards. So that's kind of a push. It didn't technically fail. It was a push, but I was trying to get under. But I ended up at exactly 78. Now, I do make a note here that I actually have 4 that would qualify for this at COMC, but I'm not counting those. For the player collections, I prefer to have the card in hand to officially take it off the checklist. So technically, I could have made it had I done a rush to try to get COMC to ship it a couple of weeks ago, but I decided I would just leave it as is, and I'll just take that into account for next year's goal. But it's kind of a push at best, but technically I'll call it a fail because I didn't quite make it. Now, overall collection-wise, I wanted to get to 2,500 plus unique cards for the Mike Modano collection, and I was able to do that. So 2,552 is the year-end total because I don't have anything that I'm expecting to get in the mail before the end of the year here in mid-December. So very successful in that regard, and I'm very happy with that. And then certified autographs wise, I was shooting for 280 plus. That's something that it depends. Sometimes I spend a lot of time targeting some of those, and I was able to get to 295. So I comfortably blew past that, and that's also going to be reflected in the goal for next year because I got to just kind of how far do I want to try to stretch? And also, given what happened in the first slide, do I want to put some more of the emphasis on trying to really take down some of those sets and then move that forward at the same time that I'm working on my player collections? Because beyond the ones that end up on the goals list, I have other player collections that I work on as well. So that's one of those things that I kind of have to bear in mind. So with that said, let's go to the 2024 goals and see what we're going to do with that. So the list of stuff on here is exactly the same as last year, but what I've done is I've made some adjustments to kind of how I want to target this. So the first one is the 2018 Topps Chrome UFC autographs. I am scratching the Mark Hunt off of this checklist until someone can prove to me it's real and show me an example of one. I'm not going to count it. So that means the Sean O'Malley is the last card that I need for this set as far as I'm concerned until shown otherwise. So the goal is going to be to basically put some money aside and pick up the Sean O'Malley, scratch that one off the list and get this one off, and then we can move on to a different set. The other one here is the 1996 Topps Mystery Finest Refractors. On the other list, if you notice, it said 25 of 26. That's because as I was putting together this whole little slideshow and everything, I decided to go on COMC and grab 4 of them. Like I said, the Bonds one is the only one that's missing, so technically that's wrong. It should be 25 of 26. I just need to get that Bonds card, and we'll scratch that one off the list. So the first 2 could literally be scratched off as soon as I basically grab 2 cards, and that'll be off the list. That leads me to the third one, which I definitely want to make some progress on, the 1996 Finest Gold Refractor. Last year, I wanted to get to 37 cards and be 10 shy. Since I did well enough, even though I didn't quite get there with the idea that I was trying to move to 37 cards, I was able to get a couple of the good ones. I've got a lot of the main players already, so I'm going to shoot for finishing the set this year. So the reason the first 2 are kind of easy in the sense that it's really 1 card for each, even though the Sean O'Malley is an expensive card. The reason I wanted to make the first 2 kind of easy is because that Finest Gold Refractor set, I'm going to have to try to target some specific cards that tend to go for a little bit more money. So I wanted to not put too much pressure on myself to have to chase too many things at the same time. So theoretically, with 14 cards, I could finish the first 3 of these in their entirety. And that would be pretty sweet because then obviously that would let me move on to some other projects. I'm not sure if there are any more modern or contemporary projects that I would want to take on right away. I might just put another vintage set on there to continue down the roadmap and maybe one newer set, but we'll see what happens. Either way, I wanted to keep the first part of this list easy enough so that I give myself a good chance of actually scratching some of these off the list so we don't carry them over into 2025. Moving forward, I've got the 2 vintage sets, the 1963 Fleer Baseball. The goal is going to be to get to 55 of 67. So I'm not going to target trying to finish this because last year I tried to be really aggressive with it, and obviously it just didn't work out because other things came up. So we're going to say 55. So that means we're getting pretty close. That means we'd be down to about a dozen to finish the set. And since it is, like I said, PSA set registry and I have to get the graded versions, it means that I can be a little bit more particular and pick and choose the right copy to fit in with the rest of my set. So that's kind of how we're going to target that. And then lastly, for the 53 Bowman Color, we're going to shoot to get to 100 cards as part of the checklist and hopefully be 60 away from finishing it. Ideally, if I was going to kind of shoot for a little bit of a stretch goal, I would love to get to 120, which would put me at 75% of the set. I'm not in a big hurry because I'm trying to pick and choose certain cards that I think fit with either what's going on with the binder or if I have some of the graded ones. And I've picked up a lot of the stars and a lot of the Hall of Famers. So it's one of those things where now it's just picking and choosing the right copies that I think fit with the aesthetic that I'm going for with the set. And I'm enjoying the project. So it's one of those things where the process is kind of enjoyable. I'm in no hurry to really finish it quickly because what's going to happen, and I can tell you for the 53 Bowman Color specifically, the moment I finish that set, then I'm going to start working on the 53 Topps. And that's the next one that is on the pipeline for me as far as that piece is concerned, because that's definitely one that I've been wanting to target and work on, but I didn't want to start two 50 sets at the same time because that's enough of a challenge to keep me busy. That's why I said when I look at this set section of the goals, having at least 3 sets there, well, 2 sets for sure, and then a third set that are reasonably doable and fairly straightforward, opens up some bandwidth for me to potentially really make a dent in the latter two. And that I'd like to do that ideally. If I could make all of these goals for the year, that'd be fantastic. And any stretch goals that I manage as far part of that as well would be really great. But it's one of those things I wanted to make it a little bit more attainable and take it a little bit lighter on myself for this year comparatively to last year. And then we'll kind of play it by ear from there. So going into 2025, we'll see how things sit at that point with various collections, because some of my player collections are kind of plateauing at the moment. And I've got some things that I've got to figure out as far as what I want to do for those. But I've still got enough challenges in front of me that I think this will be enough to keep me busy and to give me a little bit of a focus while not distracting me too much from other potential things that I want to work on. So that leads us to the last slide here, which is the 2023 collecting goals for the Mike Modano PC here. We're going to use the same 5-year section here, 1995-96 to 99-2000, so the last 5 years of the 1990s. We were trying to get to under 78 different cards remaining on the want list, specifically the want list, because that list is dwindling. But it does get tougher because the remaining cards get a little bit trickier. They tend to be lower numbered or higher ratio. One of those things where they do get tougher as we go along. Now, specifically, I did mention in the previous slide that 4 are currently sitting at ComC that didn't get counted that would have been part of this. So it means the real current want list for these is actually 74 cards. So my goal is going to be to get it under 70. Really, all I'm shooting to do is I'm trying to get 5 more cards off that want list. And as I said, they are getting tougher. Some of them are just flat out either expensive or they just don't crop up too often. So it's one of those things that'll be plenty challenging enough with a checklist that is dwindling every single time I add another card. The other 2 are mostly fun numbers that are kind of vanity metrics. They really don't mean anything because the little numerical milestones are mostly fun for me. But realistically, every time Upper Deck releases another set that they put Modano in, maybe they add a dozen cards to it. If you just chase after that, well, there's a dozen more cards. And every single time they do that, and there's a parallel version of it, and there's so much stuff in the latter portion of his playing days and post-playing days that I could literally get to 3,000, 3,500, maybe even 4,000 cards fairly easily if I just went on eBay and started hitting buy it nows. The goal has been to kind of focus predominantly on the playing days. I don't specify that here, but that is usually what I try to do. Although I will still grab some newer cards, like the one in the image there that I include as part of the slide. That is a newer card, but it's an on-card autograph, and stuff like that I like as kind of a little subset of what I work on. And that leads me to the last point here with the certified autographs. I got just shy of 300 different certified autographs. I can say that at ComC right now, I've probably got about 6 or 7 more. So on paper, I have over 300. So it's one of those things where I try to make my goal here, adjust accordingly to that. And I'm going to say 330 different. Obviously, a stretch goal would be something like 350. Now, one of these days, I want to get to 500 different certified autographs. And there's enough of them out there and more being added all the time that that's something I can definitely do. But it's one of those things where I just chip away at it year by year and keep moving towards that number. Again, the number doesn't mean anything because really, who needs that many? But it's one of those things that just keeps the player collection section of it enjoyable for me, just having these little numbers to chase, in addition to having very specific wants that I prioritize. So it's a list of priorities. I try to shoot for playing day stuff first, especially stuff that's really in that top tier of what remains. That's always the top priority. But if I can get some of this other stuff along the way, it's a lot of fun for me, and it keeps things interesting. And that's what I would kind of recommend for you if you do a similar kind of exercise. Figure out goals that are challenging enough to make it interesting for you, but at the same time attainable so that you're not just getting discouraged that you fall short of all of them. This past year, I didn't hit a lot of my goals, but that's okay. I was able to get a lot of other cards that fit into different sections of my collection that I enjoyed. So it's one of those things where I still had a lot of fun with the last collecting year and plan to do so into collecting years in the future. So that's it for the 2023 goals year recap, along with the 2024 goals, even though this slide is actually mislabeled. So that was my bad. I just noticed that now. But anyway, so that is the 2024 goals as well. And that'll be kind of what I'll be shooting for in the upcoming year here. As usual, I do emphasize that this is really more for me than anything else. It's just a way of giving myself a way of tracking this and keeping myself accountable to it. But maybe some of you do a similar thing with your own collections. So best of luck to you if you do a similar exercise to this. Hopefully you were able to get your goals from this past year, and then hopefully you'll be able to do well, just as well in the next year, or improve or figure out what works for you as far as accomplishing whatever goals you're trying to accomplish with your own collection. Aside from that, more videos coming up on the channel, live streams on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. As we're moving here towards the end of the year, the schedule does change a little bit. This next Friday will have a live stream on it, but it will be a little bit shorter than normal because we will do a Christmas Eve special, which will also be a shorter live stream, but it'll be from the homestead And then for New Year's, I think we'll be running a full live stream, but more than likely, we may do a little Friday thing, but honestly, most likely for New Year's, it'll just be the New Year's Eve episode on New Year's Eve, which will fall on a Sunday. As far as the podcast episodes, that's something I'm going to figure out. I think this next podcast episode should be scheduled normally. And then for the next two, the episodes would have been recording on Christmas Day or New Year's Day. I think that's not gonna happen. But I will get some kind of a podcast episode out just the same, because I can always record something. So it's one of those things where I'll figure out kind of how we're going to arrange that one. With all that said, thanks very much. Like if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you in the next one.